First up this morning, one of the big proposals this legislative session is about tax reform, and not just fooling around at the margins, but actual tax reform that is structurally changing how we tax in West Virginia. And this is coming out of the Senate Select Committee on Tax Reform, where Senator Robert Karnes, a Republican from Upshur County, is the chairman of the Select Committee on Tax Reform, and he and his committee have been working on this. They have a plan they're going to putting forward. He joins us on Metro News Talkline. Senator, good morning. Thanks for joining us. How are you, sir?
Pretty good. Good morning, Hoppy. How are you doing?
I'm well, sir. Thank you. If you're on speakerphone, that's fine. Just make sure you're up close to that speaker so we can hear you loud and clear. Or that's good. Okay. So,
Right.
Senator, my understanding is this plan says that let's fundamentally change how we tax West Virginians. So let's get rid of the personal income tax. Let's get rid of consumer sales tax. Let's get rid of, I think, corporate net might also be in there. Let's get rid of a lot of these taxes and replace them with a consumption tax. Is that your plan? And explain more how that would work.
Sure. And a little bit of that's kind of more just a trading in terms. What we wind up with is very much like a sales tax.
Right.
But the way we wrote the bill was to try to reduce confusion and make it clear that it's a little bit different than the simple sales tax. Since currently we have an awful lot of exemptions, by some estimates as much as $2.7 billion, although the estimate that I'm using is about $2.1 billion. And so by bringing in a lot of money from those exemptions and essentially broadening out the base, we raise almost as much money as what we're already collecting in personal income tax. And economists across the country, I think, are generally in agreement that taxes on income are much more harmful to the economy than taxes on consumption. Mm-hmm. So by making this switch, West Virginia can join what is a fairly small group of states that don't have an income tax. And what we see in those states is that by and large, they outgrow the national average, they outgrow their immediate neighbors. And so they're really good examples of how states can make their tax code work to grow their economies.
Senator, the only way, not the only way, but in order to do it, as you pointed out, you've got to eliminate almost all, if not all, of the exemptions. So that means that food, clothing, medicine, healthcare services, utilities, all kinds of things, those things I mentioned, they're just necessities of life, they would have to be taxed as well. So doesn't that make it a pretty regressive tax, meaning I'm probably okay, you're probably okay, but a lot of folks on the lower to lower middle portion of the income scale are going to be harder hit?
Well, on the face of it, it kind of looks like that, but it actually doesn't work out that way in the numbers.
Okay.
And let me just spell a couple of things.
Sure.
First thing, medical services are not taxed under the plan as it currently stands, and I don't think that we're going to go after medical services. So we do contain some exemptions in there. Charitable institutions, for example, won't pay sales tax, and obviously government won't pay sales tax. So there are some exceptions in there. But when we come back to this question of regressivity, our current state income tax code kicks in at a fairly low number. And so currently, if you're a family of four and you have a household income of about $30,000 a year, you're paying probably at least $600, maybe as much as $800 a year in personal income tax. So eliminating the personal income tax immediately saves that low-income household at least $600 a year. And actually the numbers that work out are closer to $800 a year. Mm-hmm. So right there you save that much. And then when you look at what they might turn around and pay in a sales tax, if we take the rate to 8% as what it currently is in the bill, and I should clarify that doesn't automatically mean 8%. It means that we have to start somewhere, and then we have to figure out from a fiscal note what the numbers actually are. So we know we're not going to go beyond 8%, but if we find out we don't need 8%, then that sales tax rate will be lower. But if we assume 8%, the average household that's making $30,000 a year might pay an additional $200 to $250 a year in sales tax. So they're going to save, quite likely, close to $800 a year in income tax, but pay $250 a year in sales tax. So for a low-income family, this actually represents money back in their pocket.
Senator
So
Robert,
I would say
go ahead.
Somewhat counter to the idea of regressivity.
Senator Robert Karnes is with us, chairman of the Select Committee that's working on tax reform on this plan to replace a lot of the existing taxes and reform tax policy in West Virginia and change to a consumption tax. One thing it does do, I think the beauty of it, and I'm not sure if it all adds up yet, frankly, and I'm not sure this is a good time to do it for a variety of reasons. However, one thing it does do, it does empower consumers, because you're saying you don't pay an income tax, and so now you have more money, and you can make you're more empowered to make the decisions about what you want to buy, and then the tax you pay accordingly. So
absolutely,
I think that's an empowering part. I'm sure that's a big part of your pitch.
It is, and that's absolutely true. And what you'll actually find, particularly again on the personal income tax, is that a certain percentage of people are going to take that money and they're going to save it or they're going to invest it. And that's good in a capitalist system, a free market system like we have, because typically investment means an increase in productivity, which means a decrease in consumer prices in the long run, at least in relative cost. But at the same time, the vast majority of people are going to go out there and they're going to buy a new TV, or they're going to buy some new clothes, or they're going to buy a new sofa, and that helps to stimulate the economy. And it's all done based on people's individual choice, just as you said. So when you don't pay that tax on your income, if you save that money, you don't pay the tax until you spend it. But if you do decide to go spend the money, maybe it's just dinner out a few more nights a month over the course of a year. Either way, you're directly stimulating the economy there, but it's all based on consumer choice.
Senator Robert Karnes is with us, Republican R-Upshur County, who's chair of the Select Committee in the Senate working on tax reform, and they've come out with a bill to replace a lot of the existing taxes, including the personal income tax, the consumer sales tax, and all, corporate net, right? Is corporate net in there too?
The way the corporate net piece works is that once we make this transition, we expect that the sales tax, the consumption tax, as we're calling it, will generate more revenue as the economy begins to grow. And see, the corporate net income tax is a great tax to reduce whenever you want to see that long-term investment in your economy. So short-term, we need help in West Virginia, and the personal income tax helps to stimulate immediately. In fact, there's some studies that show that it'll improve unemployment rates, that it'll improve durable goods purchases and things like that. But it's the corporate net income tax that really provides the best long-term bang for the buck. So yes, as soon as we stabilize coming out of the switch on the income tax versus consumption tax, then we use the rainy day fund, much as what was previously done, to gradually reduce the corporate net income tax down to zero.
Senator, let me point out another challenge to this idea, and that is you're from Upshur County, and you are landlocked. You're not in a border county. A lot of major communities in West Virginia are along the border. And if there is an 8% consumption tax on pretty much all economic activity, then West Virginians, what is to keep them from going into border communities where they say, well, I can save money on food here, I can save money on the purchase of a television there, I can save money on whatever it is. So isn't there a risk that you drive consumption out of state in those border communities?
Well, on the face of it, it kind of looks like that's a strong possibility. However, having lived around the country, I'm a West Virginia native, but I've lived in several other states, including states like Washington, which have a very high sales tax right next door to Oregon. And yet, when you look at the growth rates, Washington is outgrowing Oregon, but it's not only outgrowing Oregon as a state, it's outgrowing Oregon right on the border. And so, given some of my sort of anecdotal experience with the way this might actually work, I had an analyst here go across the entire country and look at every single example state where we have no income tax and perhaps a higher sales tax, and compare it to the next door neighbor, which has a lower sales tax. And 2 out of 3 times the state with the higher sales tax grows faster in the border counties against their state that has a lower sales tax. And that holds true even when you talk about differentials of greater than 2% sales tax. So what seems intuitive, like might be the case, doesn't seem to bear out in the actual numbers. And another good example that's not too far off from us is Tennessee. Again, highest sales tax in the nation in Tennessee, Virginia 5.5%. But when you look at the Tennessee-Virginia border, it's Tennessee that's growing faster on the border than Virginia is.
Senator, let me talk about the timing of this, because we're in this pinch right now, well documented. We talk about it all the time. And we're trying to fill a hole in next year's budget through whatever means possible. Is this, and we don't, I mean, you can run the numbers and you can come up with estimates, but that consumer sales tax, for example, that you're talking about replacing, I mean, the personal income tax, that's a huge one. That's like $1.8 billion. That's about half of the general revenue budget. The next biggest one is the consumer sales tax. So these are big numbers. These are absolutely integral to the budget. So when we're facing this budget shortfall, this tight budget, is this the best time to make this switch, or should we wait until things are a little bit more solid to take this, what would be a risk, quite frankly?
Well, what I would say is that, one, if we were in good times, we wouldn't even be thinking about making such a change. And historically, what happens in West Virginia is, according to the price of natural resources and whether or not the EPA is standing in the way, we have a boom, and then we have a bust, and then we have a boom again, and then we have a bust again. And we never talk about doing any of these big things in the boom because the money's flowing and everybody's happy. So what I would say is the only time we're ever likely to actually do this is in the bust side of the cycle. So from that perspective, this is the time. From the next perspective, what I would say is, yes, it seems like it's a big change. However, we are able to run numbers that may not be perfect, and I'll be the first to say that, but we can run numbers that are going to be fairly close to accurate. And we can structure this in a way, just as we did in the corporate net income tax piece that you pointed out, so that if the revenue estimates are short, then there are alternate ways of raising the revenue. And so this is not, I don't believe, a particularly high-risk item or a high-risk, I should say, approach, because we can structure this in a way that mitigates much, if not all, of the risk. And so it's a time to do it because we can't continue with this boom-bust cycle in West Virginia. It's destroyed our economy. It's driven all of our kids out of the state. We have to make this kind of a change, and now is probably better than ever. And then finally, we're taking very seriously the risks, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that those are mitigated.
Senator Robert Karnes, a Republican, Upshur County, and chairman of the Select Senate Committee working on tax reform. Senator, thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and we'll be following this closely as it begins to move through the body. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.